Melissa Mohr worked for 17 years as a teacher and an administrator in a traditional private school in West Virginia. But last year, she and some of her colleagues decided to venture out on their own to create a microschool. Her City on a Hill microschool opened in Bridgeport, West Virginia in September with about 50 kids, and it continues to attract families who want an alternative to a conventional public or conventional private school. Her model blends the freedom, flexibility, and personalization of homeschooling with the structure and support of a classroom experience. Melissa Mohr, welcome to the Liberated podcast.
Thank you.
I'm so glad you're here. I was so pleased to visit City on a Hill just a few weeks ago when I was visiting West Virginia and see what you've been able to create really in just a matter of months from, kind of working in this traditional private school setting at the end of the last academic year, spring of 2022, to then opening just a few months later your microschool with, several dozen students is just remarkable. And it's just great to see this warm and welcoming learning environment that you've created.
Well,
So I
thank you.
want to I want to get into kind of what City on a Hill is and your motivation for creating a microschool, but let's step back a little bit and talk about your career path. Like, what made you decide to go into education? What was it that attracted you to the private school that you spent almost 2 decades in before again choosing education entrepreneurship more recently?
Okay, well, I knew I wanted to be a teacher. I would say my earliest memory is second grade. It was just one of those things. If I was playing, whatever with my friends, we always somehow integrated school into it. And I was the one that was doing the teaching and making the assignments and writing on the board. It's just something. I don't know how I knew, but I knew. And there was never a question. I knew in middle school and high school, all the schools, I knew that I was going to college one day to be a teacher. So that's how I got into education. It was just a thing that I just so look forward to. As far as um, the private school setting, so I taught for a few years as a substitute teacher in our local county schools. And that was enough for me for substitute teaching. And at the time, West Virginia had a massive influx of teachers, and there was really most of the teachers were not at retirement age, maybe one or two here and there, but they told us, 5 years of subbing before there would be positions opening up. And so after about a year and a half of that, I pretty much knew that I wasn't cut out for substitute teaching. I needed my home base. I needed my group of kids that I got to know and was able to speak to their needs. I felt like as a sub that I would just get to know a group of kids slightly and know where, they needed help. And then it would be time, to leave or whatever. So then I had children, and so I stayed home. And that was another reason for education for me, is being a mother was super important to me, and being a mother that was there. And that's no slam to working mothers. We need those too. But I knew that I would stay home with my kids. And so I stayed home for about 10 years. And when it was getting close for my oldest, my son, to go to kindergarten, my father-in-law said, I really think you need to think about homeschooling the kids. And I said, oh, no, 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 I'm not made for that. And my father-in-law said, but you're a teacher. And he wintered in Florida, and his pastor of his church down there, they homeschooled, and they had some really amazing kids. And I just said, to my father-in-law, Jim, I can't be the only person who pours into my children. They deserve other relationships. They deserve other people. And some of my fondest memories of school were my favorite teachers. And I just didn't think that I could be all of that to them. So he said, well, would you at least consider, a private, like a Christian school? And I said, well, I'll look around and see what we have. There was not a huge homeschool movement in our area at that time. It is a very different place now. There's lots of homeschoolers, there's lots of groups that you can join. And had that been available, I may have gone that route. But so come to find out, my closest friend, her daughter was a year older than my son. And she said, hey, we've put our kids at this local private school. We really love it. And there's an open house in a couple weeks. I know you're getting ready to send Bailey to kindergarten. And so we went and visited, and I fell in love with the school immediately. It had the family atmosphere, it had the small classrooms, and it had a focus on biblical worldview, which was also important to my husband and I. And so we decided to try it out. And the next thing, we knew, the kids were now all grown. The baby, she was only 8 months old at that time. She finally is in kindergarten. And my principal, who at the time had asked me multiple years, will you come and teach? Because she knew I had a teaching degree. And I wouldn't. I said, not until the baby's in kindergarten. And that's how I ended up at that school. Never in a million years did I dream that we went for that open house when our first one was 5, that I would then spend 17 years educating there. So that's kind of our story with that.
Amazing. So you went from being a teacher in that school to then being an
Yeah,
administrator.
right. Yes, I was became lead teacher. Then several years down the road, I became the assistant administrator, and then I was the administrator for 5 years.
And so what made you decide, along with some of your colleagues, to leave that traditional private school environment that had worked so well for your children and that you had been dedicating much of your career to venture into entrepreneurship and sort of this unknown world of microschooling? What was the motivation there?
Well, though I will say that a private school to some degree, has less pressures on the outside of them than maybe the public system. There's still a lot of pressures, and there's still a lot of push for, certain test scores and certain, amount of curriculum taught at a certain time, and those types of things. There was a lot that went into the decision to leave. My youngest went all the way K3 through 12th grade at that school. So the decision to leave was, it was heart-wrenching, really. And quite honestly, I didn't know that I was leaving to start the micro school. I just knew that it was time for something else. And I had some ideas. I have a niece that lives in the Outer Banks, and she's 8 years old. And I was like, I'll go there and sub for a couple of months and come home and drag. My husband's retired, so I thought, well, I can just drag him along with me wherever. And then I had the idea that the little elementary school that's literally a half a mile from my home, I could go down there and sub a couple days a week and still get to do maybe some of the things that being an administrator kept me from. It's a very, very demanding job with very little hours in the day left at the end of the day. So I really didn't know for sure, but I had these colleagues who were saying, listen, we're looking into this micro school thing. It's really a cool thing. I think you'd be interested in it. And I told them, listen, I'll step back and I'll pray about it, but I don't know what I want to do. And June 3rd was my last day at my school. And by the following Monday, I felt like a different person. The weight of the world was off of me. I literally just felt joyful, if I can explain that. And my friends are like, we need you. We need your help. We can't do this by ourselves. And I said, oh, what the heck? I'll do it. I'll give it a shot. And the more I read about it, and the more uh, just looking at a lot of the freedoms that it was going to allow us, that we wouldn't have to, there's so much of the organizational part that I don't think people know until you're in administration, that I wasn't going to have to be, that was a non-issue. And we decided to do a Zoom meeting with a lady from West Virginia, Jamie Buckland. We did a Zoom meeting with her, and she gave us the ins and outs of a microschool, as far as the legislation was concerned in our state, that sort of thing. And I took notes and then kept texting her and asking her this and asking her that. And one thing led to another. And I mean, I'll tell you, I had my doubts that you could make a school happen from, say, June 6th to September 6th, but we could, and we did. A lot of things fell in place for us that could have been roadblocks. And it just happened. And so for that, I'm very grateful. I am doing what I love in a completely different environment that I ever understood. And so here we are, and it's going great. I am also teaching. If that tells you anything, I can be the head of school and I can be a teacher in a micro school. We go 4 days a week. So the 5th day is spent doing lots of administration things for me, but and I also have time to do classroom things on that day. So it's very possible, if somebody wants to do it. I wouldn't recommend trying to start it in 3 months. Give yourself 6 or 8 months, but you can do it.
But it's possible. And yes,
It
it
is.
does sound like it brings the best of everything for you, being able to teach and lead the school and be around some amazing colleagues, and also provide that flexibility to the families in your micro school. So West Virginia is pioneering in a lot of ways, including creating sort of a new designation of micro schools. The legislature passed a sort of an exemption to compulsory schooling laws, defining what a micro school is as separate from a public or private school, and also separate from homeschooling. And that sounds like is what enabled you to sort of recognize a microschooling as a new approach, as a possibility for you with your school. And of course, you mentioned Jamie Buckland from the West Virginia Families United for Education, who's doing so much to sort of encourage education entrepreneurship in West Virginia, and also connect families to those programs that are now more accessible thanks to the passage of the Hope Scholarship Program, which is the nearly universal ESA program that West Virginia is implementing at the moment as we speak. And so, great to see all that. And so when you first learned about microschooling, it sounds like your colleagues, brought it to you first, and then you were talking with Jamie. What was it that appealed to you about that model? I mean, what was it that was different? You mentioned kind of less accountability in terms of testing that private schools might have, but what else was it that you found interesting about this kind of new and innovative idea?
Well, the one thing, and this isn't because any of us, we are all, my colleagues and I would say we could all be labeled as workaholics. We don't have to be, but I would say, so we're all very hard workers, but the idea of being able to sort of mesh and take the best things about private school, which is being able to choose different curriculum, being able to just to have the smaller groups of kids, those sorts of things. And then the other is partnering with parents in a deeper level, having them take responsibility for a portion of their child's education. So that homeschool element of, it opened up a lot of curriculum, number one, that we could use, that was really attractive to us, that we'd always said, hey, we really like this, but it's really deemed a homeschool curriculum, and with accreditation requirements, not sure that we can get that handled or, pushed through. But knowing that we could be educating kids well in a small learning pod like situation, but then there was a day a week, with a micro school, there is no real, you have to be there 5 days a week, 180 days. It allowed us to be able to say, well, what would be ideal? And as we went around the circle with my colleagues and I, we all said it would be ideal to have the kids 4 days, have them educate at home 1 day, and be able to start speaking to a lot of the sides of kids that we couldn't, because we were under we were under attendance constraints, we were under testing constraints. And so we started saying, and I had already said this was weird, but throughout last school year, I had said to a lot of my colleagues, wouldn't it be cool if we could have different people come in and have like career exploration days with our high schoolers, where we have like an electrician come in and speak about the education required, speak about what does a normal day look like for a general electrician, and just little things like that. But we might be able to do that one day in a 9 weeks, but to do that every week, I just felt like it would so develop a side of the kids that was being left unspoken to. And so that's what we're doing with Fridays. And so we just had our first showcase. Middle school students had a showcase, high school students had a showcase, and they were responsible for exploring either giftings, talents, possible job options, especially our high schoolers. And then they had to give a 3 to 5 minute presentation on what they had done with their Fridays in their semester. And we had kids who were looking into computer programming and who had learned a whole language to program with. We had kids who started looking at all the various options for nursing education in our state, and what the requirements would be, what it would take to get into the nursing program, how much it would cost. We had people who were really interested musically and really just had not had the time. And so they took music lessons on Fridays. We had a drummer, a little girl, 8th grade girl who, wow, she came a long way in the semester. And we had a couple of pianists who have learned to play the piano. We've had various things. We had somebody who thinks that she wants to do a bakery one day. So she learned to bake literally a cheesecake, all kinds of different things, had pictures and video of her learning these kinds of things, and just talking about, the price of products and that type of thing. It was really an interesting evening to see all of that. And that's an entire part of their education that we really couldn't speak to in the past.
It's really interesting, this trend toward flexible learning schedules, hybrid schooling, and especially 4-day school weeks. This is something that school districts now across the country are beginning to adopt, almost, I
Yes.
would say, in response to this interest in more flexible schedules, and some are implementing it as a response to teacher shortages. But for you, in creating City on a Hill microschool that's 4 days a week and then the 5th day at home for the kids, how did parents respond to that? Because if I recall correctly, the majority of your students came from a traditional public or private school, and then
Right.
you do have some homeschoolers, but that's not the majority. And so
Mhm.
that must have been a bit of a shift for them as parents to now have kind of 4 days a week in a microschool and then a day
It
home.
is.
Do they
And
like that? What is that like for them?
I was concerned. That was probably when we were starting this. I said to my colleagues, we need to be prepared for people that we thought might be interested in this option. When they know about the 4 days, we need to be prepared that there may be parents who say, well, I don't have any help for Fridays. I can't do that. My job is strictly Monday through Friday, and I just don't have the ability, nor does my husband. But that really wasn't it. It was more like, oh, okay, yeah, that might be a challenge, but let me think about it. And we had our first informational meeting in the middle of June. So 2 weeks later into the planning process, we had our first informational meeting of this is our brainchild. This is what we think we want to do. and we want you to come. We want you to bring your students. And so there were families who said, listen, we're going to have to think about this. We're going to have to come up with creative ways. And then we had a couple of families who said it just won't work and we just can't do it. And it just is what it is. You're never, ever going to be able to please everyone with whatever model you come up with. And so we had to know that at the beginning. And so what has happened is we've had families who, are working different shifts. So 4 10-hour days and then being available on Friday. We have families who have a grandmother who is, spending that day with them. And then mom and dad are spending, Friday evening, Saturday or Sunday working on what we call Friday work. And so it's worked out. I know that probably for some, it's definitely been a stretch, but at the same time, it's enabled them to have a hand in educating their child, taking back a little more control, a little more just ownership. It's pretty amazing when you teach a child something and then they remember that for the rest of their life and they use it for whatever. And now we're enabling parents to be a part of that. And so I think if it was maybe 3 and 2, I don't know that it would have worked. West Virginia, I would say most families, both parents work. So I don't know if it would have been like a 3 and 2 days, it could have been a deal breaker for a lot of families.
So you have that schedule flexibility now with the microschool. You also have curriculum flexibility. You are a faith-based microschool, City on a
Yes.
Hill Christian Academy.
Mhm.
And you also came, as you mentioned, from a faith-based Christian private school. So
Mhm.
in what ways do you have more curriculum flexibility do you find now in your microschool than even you did in the traditional private
Right.
school?
Well, there were some curriculum that we knew about, but we really didn't feel like we had the room to develop it. Sunlight curriculum, we love the literature-based learning. And so that's learning about history, becoming better readers, all of the things based through books. And that was attractive to us. The problem is that there aren't teachers manuals. There aren't, there's a schedule and there are some questions that you can use for discussion. But when you're with students all day in a classroom, for instance, I'm with 4th and 5th, I can't just discuss with them all day. They need to be moving and working. It's different when you're at home, and everybody's, maybe snuggled up on the couch to read this portion of the novel today and discuss it. That's a little different setting. But when you have, 10 little ones, there's got to be kind of a bit more structure. But we're able to do that without the requirements of our curriculum has to be, certain, we have to have a curriculum map and that type of thing, which, in the previous school, those were things. And like adopting new curriculum or bringing something in was kind of a big deal at the old school. Granted, we're not willy-nilly and adopting new curriculum every day just because we want to, but if something really isn't working, then next year that's going to be out the door and we'll do something different. So that's kind of there was a science curriculum that we loved that what only was for homeschoolers, and we loved it because all of the labs and all of the ideas, the hands-on type things, were all something that you can do in your kitchen because it was made for homeschool families. So it wasn't, you need a beaker and you need, a Bunsen burner and you need all the things. It's still doing a science project, but with a whole different push. And we really loved that because there might be Fridays, I send the science the lab home for the Friday work that week, because I think it's important the parents see what we're studying about. There might be weeks when I want to do the science project. So that was a joy. It was to be able to dip into that curriculum. So
I
yeah,
love that the homeschooling curriculum that homeschooling families have long enjoyed is now something that you're finding can be adapted for
yeah,
a larger classroom setting and still provide that personalization and flexibility that you weren't able to necessarily
right,
find as much of in a traditional private school
yeah. And
setting.
the teachers pay teachers thing that's out there, it is anybody using a curriculum such as Sunlight that's more of a literature based, it is your best friend. And you can, you know what, I spend all day with my students, so I know exactly what they're missing. So there might be 3 units about Old Yeller, but I'm going to pick this one because I know that they, are definitely weak on the comprehension, or their vocabulary needs developed more. And so I will pick a unit based on that. Just the week before, I will find that unit. And it's just pretty amazing, rather than, oh, they have a book and a workbook and we have to keep working through it. So,
So I know when I met you in at City on a Hill and visited the school in December, you were telling me about some of the transformation that you've already seen in some of your students. The parents are so happy, so satisfied with the microschool. I wonder if you can share kind of generally what you're finding in terms of the response to your new microschool.
well, we have a student who notoriously has been struggling for years. And we would say that the student is probably 2 years behind, um, but kept being passed on in the public system. Not, no, I'm not faulting the public system. What I'm saying is there are certain requirements, they will not hold them back, where in our situation, okay, well, the reading and the math need focused on, and it isn't serving him to be in the 7th grade. So for those 2 classes, we're popping him back and we're going to speak to that need. So we met with parents and we said, hey, this is what we see and this is what we want to speak to. We think that if we back him up in these subjects, that he will gain so much more rather than him grasping at straws 2 years ahead. And the parents were in agreement with us. And we said, let's try it and let's see what happens. And so some of the phrases that were spoken about him was, he can't, there's no real comprehension. There isn't, he doesn't have the memory. He can't hold on to these facts. The math facts are almost impossible for him to learn. Um, he's doing amazing. He is doing amazing. That, like, when I met with the teachers after about probably 3 to 4 weeks of that, I was like, so tell me what's going on. And they started telling me, and I had goosebumps because that's almost impossible to do in the private system as well. There isn't the flexibility unless the parents are willing to say, we're pushing him back. This child is still in his grade. We're just able to speak in these areas on a lower level. And we're able to educate him and fill in the gaps, the holes, the places that just he didn't get it the first time around. Um, and that has been a blessing and a half, because I will admit, because of our experience and background, we were concerned. What if we can't speak to him? What if we get in and we're 8 weeks down the road, 9 weeks down the road, and it's bad news and things aren't going well? What are we going to do? And so basically with the parents, we said, we want to give it a shot. We
Hmm.
want to try this. And I just am so thankful for them for being as flexible as they are, because sometimes, a parent can get news like that and get panicked. and say, what, I mean, we can't put him back to the 5th grade. We can't put him back to the whatever 3rd grade. That'll be detrimental. Well, we're not putting him back there. We're just building on where he was. We met him where he was instead of expecting him to get up where he should be. And it's made a huge difference. So that's been really special. Some of the other things has just been, oh, so Mrs. Moore, you're okay if I text you? Yeah, I need you to text me, or you call me, but, don't, sometimes there's really important things that parents need to get a hold of me about. Will it always be this way? I don't know, but that's another reason why I like the micro school. Micro, as in it's still a really great educational place. It's just smaller. And I want parents to know who I am and to know if I have a question, she's fine with me asking, not, well, I'll ask this other parent and this other parent, and now I have a misinformed idea of what is happening for the Christmas play or um, those are just little perks as a head of school. Those are my little perks, is that I know everybody well and everybody feels comfortable communicating with their teacher and with their principal. So,
And those examples, especially the one of the boy who's now performing quite well in this more mastery-focused, mastery-based environment, really shows the power of personalized learning and the small setting that again makes microschools so special. And I think also is more broadly representative of what can happen when children are in the right educational setting for them, that they
exactly.
can
And it's
flourish.
different for every child. And that's the thing. That's why it is wonderful to have different educational options available to all kids, whether it's traditional private, whether it's, hey, they're soaring in the public system, whether it's, hey, we want to homeschool. It's real important to us. Part of how we want to educate our kids is we want to travel once a month to wherever. Our My husband travels, and so we want to be with him. So I'm homeschooling. I think that's great. And I think that that's, if you have the ability and the means to educate your child and that's what you want to do, then you should be doing that. And I think I have a funny feeling that COVID was like, whatever it was, the catalyst for our country to say, okay, so spending every day with my kids was really hard, but it was also really, really rewarding. And though I have to go back to work, I'd still like to be a part of their lives. They're my child. We are a family unit. I want to be a part. And so I think there's like a lot of different ways that I hope it never goes back to the way it exactly was before COVID, because I feel like, at least in our area, it was more like, oh yeah, the public system, that's where you educate your kids. And then private education was, it was a small percentage of people. So.
Well, and it does seem like with the passage of Hope Scholarship, again, the nearly universal ESA program in West Virginia, it's helping to expand access to more of these education options, and hopefully also helping to catalyze the growth of more microschools and learning models for families in West Virginia. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how you see Hope Scholarship and kind of education entrepreneurship moving forward in West Virginia over the coming years.
Oh, it's gonna boost educational entrepreneurship for sure. That is a huge, in the state of West Virginia, probably the biggest hurdle for families. They may have heard of a private school. Oh yeah, I heard of that. They hear it and they just block it because they know financially we don't have the means. Both parents are working, and we're already, we're trying to save for their college education. We're trying to take them on a big trip at Christmas, this, that. They don't have the money. And this is going to change the whole face. We recently just took in 2 new students who they had originally had been awarded the Hope Scholarship, but then it was caught up in litigation, that sort of thing. And it was so important that they have it, that there was no way for them to send their children without that. And so I got a phone call at the beginning. Well, no, I got a phone call at the beginning of December asking if there was space. And both of their classes were almost at the line. We have a cutoff line, especially with our first year. We didn't want to take in too many kids and not know what we were doing year one. So mom called, and we discussed it, and they came and they toured, and they said that, they wanted to do it, and they're so excited. She called me a little bit ago to tell me about her scholarship funds and what she had found out today. We're still getting those dispersed at the moment. And they're just like, thank you so much again for this opportunity. This is everything we'd wanted. She happens to work 4 days a week, and her day off is Friday. So it worked perfectly for them. And, again, they are the type of family who so wanted a different option and knew that their kids needed a different option, but could not speak to it until the scholarship came into play. And I think private or educational options are going to soar in this next year. I think this coming year is going to be kind of soar. And then I think that next year, I think it's going to just blow wide open.
I agree with you, and it will be wonderful to watch what happens in West Virginia in terms of all of these new learning possibilities for families. So
Yeah,
they really are able to find just the right one for their child, and it could be different ones for different children, even within the same family. So that's
exactly.
exciting to see where that goes. And so along those lines of education entrepreneurship and encouraging more microschool founders like you, what advice do you have for someone who's considering opening a microschool, maybe someone like you who was a longtime educator or administrator in a traditional public or private school? What advice do you have for them to take the leap?
One piece of advice I would say would try to give themselves a year. And that's only because I worked the entire summer. And when I say that, I mean morning till night. I loved it. I fed off of it. But there's a lot to consider. You want to have a board of directors that is there to support you and is really as much passion as you have for the project. You want them to have that. So it's really important to get some people behind you that are going to support you and that have business knowledge. I'm not a business person. I'm an educator. I'm with kids all day. That's where I can pretty much tell you anything about that, but I'm not a business person. Find somebody who can also support you in that. So Jamie Buckland with West Virginia Families United for Education, we met with her. She gave us step-by-step, this is what you need to do first, this is what you need to do second. She was the kind of support that I'm sending her inbox messages or emails or texts, and she's getting back to me as fast as she possibly can. You want somebody like that because you aren't going to have all the answers right off the bat. To me, getting a 501c3 is important. It can be a lot of work, but it's worth it because of the finances that you aren't paying out. And people will donate to your organization much more readily. Let's see. Be open-minded when it comes to curriculum, because at first you have to remember where I came from. I was like, well, shouldn't we just use the same curriculum we were already using? We're familiar with it, right? So if we're familiar, that's one less thing that we have to learn in this process. And slowly but surely, my colleagues were like, but I was at this store and they had this whole room of homeschool curriculum, and I couldn't help but start thumbing through it. And some of these things are, they're just, I'm really jazzed up about it. And so have the courage, I guess, to try something new and see how it goes. Those would be my biggest pieces of advice. I would, if you're starting a school for the first time, give yourself time to find good staff. Give yourself that time, because it is so worth it to work. I'm working with 10 other people and I love every single one of them. I mean, their passion for the kids, their laugh, I can hear them laugh out in the main area, and it's just a blessing to know that we're all sort of partnering together in this. Have great bylaws. You want to get that board in place, and they need to help you write really good bylaws. You want to have somebody who's familiar with the law. You want to have somebody who's familiar with education sitting on that board, because you're going to need their help. So
Ah, just such great advice. And it sounds like you've really been able to create such a joyful learning environment for your students and a joyful teaching environment for your
yeah,
educators. And parents are so satisfied, and you continue to grow and attract new families. So if my listeners and viewers want to learn more about City on a Hill and connect with your work, what is the best place for them to reach you?
we have a website. So if you want to just check that out, it's www.cityonahillwv.org. And then if you just have questions about the organization, you can email at info@cityonahillwv.org.
Melissa Mohr, thank you again for being on the Liberated
Thank you.
podcast.
I'm so appreciative that you had me, and thank you for just investing in me a little bit and a city on a hill.